One of these days, I'm going to have to ask Jan how he got his national championship armbands. Here we are going down for the Poudre Creek Road Sprint. We have left the water stop in Winters. And if you saw my other video, you might have seen I talked about my back and David Gunther and getting some adjustments I need that have been helping me along the way. As a result, my back was still feeling a little bit sore after that first sprint. I started feeling some tightness and a little pain, so I was really trying to back off. However, I did get the sense that I might be able to do a seated sprint. Seated sprint, at least for me and the condition I'm having with my back, was less taxing, I felt like, than doing a standing sprint. I thought this might be a good opportunity to lead out Dan. It's not entirely selfless, as I'm trying to get him to work with me in races next year, and it's always good to practice a lead out. In fact, I'm very strong of the opinion that if you don't practice a lead out, if you're not used to it, it's not going to result in the best efforts or the best results. It's likely that one of you will go too early or too hard or too late. So you really got to know each other. It's one of the keys to sprinting and doing a lead out. So I do decide that I'm going to try to work with Dan. And right here I tell him,
If I've got something, I'll try to lead you out. No, I can do it seated, it's fine.
I was very confident that if Dan and I worked together, we could win the sprint. Knowing the group in this race ride that I've been in a lot, I know that there's no other real strong sprinters in here. At least they haven't shown it to this point during the year. And I felt if I could even just get a good seated sprint, I could get him in front of the group and he could take it from there. In a real race, that's one of the problems if you don't know everybody. At least for me, being new to racing and learning people as I go, just trying to identify who your competition is in a sprint is part of the battle. Now, Dan earlier had expressed some concerns about me doing a lead out. He knew my back was hurting and we had talked earlier, but I wanted him to know that it was going to be okay, so I let him know that I was going to test myself.
Take some clothes and see how I feel.
So to test myself, I decided to take some rotations at the front on this one here, and a couple of more, just to see how my back felt. And after a few tests, it felt pretty good. I felt like I could put down more power than I was, and I felt comfortable with doing a seated lead out, and I wanted to let Dan know when I would go on that lead out.
I'll lead you from the last pull on the right.
So one thing I'm big on is making sure we are good with other vehicles and other cyclists. And coming up here on the right, there's a slower group of cyclists, and I'm very glad to see people pointing them out so that we know to be safe, to stay away from them, and that we don't interrupt their ride and they don't interrupt ours, just being nice and gentlemanlike. As you can see, we have begun to accelerate here pretty hard, and a gap starts to open up. And I'm trying to make sure that I get this closed down for Dan, but I do make a mistake and that I come over too far, and you can see he's out in the wind, and that's not a good thing. So that's a little bit of a bad lead out guy there, not protecting his sprinter. I should have stayed to the left a little longer. But moving on and continuing, I did look back and made sure that Dan was with us. As we're getting down to the closing laps here, what you'll see is on the right-hand side, there is a pole. That pole is about 300 meters to go. And as we look up here to the left, you'll also see a telephone pole that has little transformers on top. That's where the sprint is. So again, this pole that we're about to pass here on the right is where I'm going to launch, and it's about 300 meters. So you can see it just there, and I'm going to go ahead and accelerate for Dan, pull him up in front of the rest of the group. And then up here on the left, you'll be able to see that that's where the pole is. The white line is underneath it. It's a clear victory for Dan. It's a fun thing to lead out and something that I can do when my back wasn't feeling so good. But till next time.